Hey everybody, how you doing? I am so grateful for so many people reaching out over the last several weeks, mentioning that they have found joy reading the book. They're learning things. Strong on the Inside is meant to strengthen and improve our emotional health and intelligence so we can find greater joy. One of the things that has seemed to be a common theme in the questions that people ask me, and I also get it as I coach people and train people, is related to pausing. As you know, it is important for us to pause, process, and proceed. But some of the questions have been really linked and connected, even though they're asking the same question just a little bit differently. So on the left here, I'm just going to look over here because I've got a couple of questions. Here's some of the questions that people have asked. Hey, Mike, I love the pause method. I notice that it does de-escalate my feelings, and I notice that I am far more calm. But I also feel trapped that in the time that I'm pausing, I'm still feeling pretty negative and I still feel pretty crappy. So, great thought. So they're pausing, but they're still in this realm of thinking negatively. And so their ability to process and proceed is delayed and they're struggling. So the initial pause is there, but they're struggling. Here's another one. And you'll see what I mean by it says the same thing, just differently. Hey, Mike, great book. I'm in chapter 5 already. I am reaching out because I have a question about the pause method. I noticed that I can pause, but do you have any skills that you can share that will help me develop the ability to process the information that I'm feeling? Because I get stuck in pause mode. Okay. So do you see it's kind of, they're saying it differently, but it's the same thing. And so I've got about 5 or 6 different examples of people who've reached out and asked questions. So let me make it clear right now. If you have any questions or any thoughts about my blog, about the channel, or anything that you come across, especially in the book, reach out. Mike LaFrance, that's LAFRANCE, at strongerontheinside.com. Reach out and I will respond. I guarantee it. So I'd love to hear from you, love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. I do coaching, I do training, so I love when people reach out and I love to respond. So please reach out. Again, Mike LaFrance at strongerontheinside.com. Okay, so let's make that clear. Now, I wanted to spend some time today, and not too much because I don't want to make this video super long, about how you can pause, process, and proceed. Let's just make sure we understand, though, the importance of the pause method again. It's important to recognize that we tell ourselves stories when our emotional reactions are fueled and take charge and are at the wheel driving our eventual response. So we need to remember that we don't want to go up those rungs on the ladder of inference. The higher we go up those rungs by making assumptions and then drawing conclusions, we then start to not only tell ourselves a story, but we then believe that story. And we have to be careful, okay? So let's make sure that we understand and recognize that the pause, process, and proceed method is designed to allow our brain, that amygdala, that initial response and reaction, it takes the back seat and is replaced by the prefrontal cortex, the logic and the reasoning and capacity now to process our feelings. And that buys us some time in that replacement, and then eventually leads to more meaningful, engaging conversations. It helps you feel better about yourself, and the story that you tell yourself changes. And it also helps when you approach people and communicate with others. So this is for relationships, partners, marriage, in families and children and, other family members at work, you name it. This is not something that is isolated to a specific moment of your life. The pause method is the foundation of every communication opportunity in every relationship, okay? That's why it's so important. So I want to introduce something before I give you 3 important steps. So based off of the feedback, I'm going to give you a couple key things. Now, this isn't the book Stronger on the Inside, but I want to share these 3 things with you that are proven to work and de-escalate your reaction fairly quickly. So before I do that, I wanted to share something with you that is really important to understand. Ambiguity, right? Ambiguity is sometimes, most of the time, not that great. right? When there's a lot of definitions or things that we give a certain truth or how we look at a certain viewpoint, if we start to attach a variety of different meanings or roads, to this path, then we can start veering off pretty quickly. Ambiguity doesn't make sense in a lot of settings. For example, the law. If I'm a lawyer, right, I want facts. Ambiguity is not good, right? But ambiguity is healthy in certain scenarios. And here it is. You ready? It is especially healthy for emotional intelligence and in the process, right, and proceed method once you pause. So that's really important. Let me give you an example. And I do this in the book, Stronger on the Inside. I've done this in a few other trainings, so it might sound familiar, but for those that are watching and might not have heard it, I think it's a valuable exercise. You ready? I'm going to tell you a statement, a sentence, and I want you to tell yourself the story that comes into your mind as I share this statement. What do you visualize and what story do you tell yourself based off of the statement I give? Are you ready? Here it is. There is a woman on a mountain with binoculars. I'll say it one more time. There is a woman on a mountain with binoculars. Now I want you to take some time and figure out, what do you see? What do you visualize when I say there is a woman on a mountain with binoculars? I've used this method a lot, and I got it from a great book by Anthony Sweat several years ago. And it's a really good way to help understand ambiguity. So here's the thing. I've asked people this question by giving them this statement and asked them to then articulate to me what they visualized. So there is a woman on a mountain with binoculars. I've had people say that they're the ones holding the binoculars and they see a woman on a mountain with the binoculars that they are looking through. I've had other people say that they see a woman standing on a mountain and she's using the binoculars looking out to somewhere else. Okay. I've had people say that no one's holding binoculars, but there's binoculars on a mountain, like in a bag that you can see, and there's a woman beside it, right? Or far away from it, doesn't really matter. But they see a woman on a mountain with binoculars as well. No one's touching them. See, there's three different ways people have visualized this statement. That's ambiguity, right? And so if I were to start defining what story do I tell myself, and then the first person says, oh, no, this statement's pretty clear. It's saying that there's a woman on a mountain with binoculars, right? And she's holding the binoculars, and they're trying to, help people understand their story of what they see and how they visualize it. Our emotional reactions are the exact same. We initially will experience something and immediately tell ourselves the story of what is happening. And the danger of that is that story most likely is not true, or there's missing facts that are associated with better understanding the story that are missing. But if we are quick to jump up that ladder of inference and tell ourselves the story that we believe, that sometimes we even, want to hear, then we are taking partial truth and making it entire whole truth. And partial truth is not truth. And so the story we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves matter. And I'm not telling you not to tell yourself a story, but pausing immediately allows ourselves and gives ourselves permission to start to rewire the story we're telling ourselves. And that's really important. Okay. So it's important to recognize that the stories we tell ourselves, right, need to change. They need further depth. And that's where pause, processing, and proceeding come into play. So you ready? Here's the three things that I want to share. Number one, when you start to pause, right, and you give yourself some time, ask yourself this question, right? What story am I telling myself? Right? Spend time with your story. Don't verbalize the story in an attack or in a conversation when it's still fresh in your mind. Pausing allows you to reframe it by still spending time with that story, but asking yourself, what story am I telling myself? Right? The advantage of that, and you'll see it here on the screen right now with you, right? There's an advantage to that. So, and I'm just looking at it here while you look at it on the screen, right? So this Instantly slows the emotional surge, creates awareness, right? It signals this is a thought and not a fact. That's why it's important to pause, right? We are trying to distinguish the difference between a thought and a fact. What is, actually happening compared to what am I feeling? And how are those feelings guiding my thought process? And so that's really important. That pause starts the rewiring and starts to slow down the amygdala's response, right? And here's a great photo quickly. The amygdala's response compared to, right, the prefrontal cortex that needs to take the driver's seat instead, right, and take over. So that pause and that question, what story am I telling myself? What am I actually experiencing right now? And what am I telling myself? So important. And as you start to do that, you will start to uncover things. You'll start to spend time with that story. And some of it will be mingled with reality and facts, but also interpretation, right? And other misunderstandings that you might interject into the experience. Okay? So that's really important. And that's important because it leads to number 2. And remember, as I share these things, right, it happens instantaneously, right? We start to react immediately. And when we pause, we slow things down, but we can easily get to step number 2 fairly quickly as we start to pay attention to what story are we telling ourselves. And as you can see on the screen, again, number 2 is, right, what I actually know for sure, right? So what do I actually know for sure is, because asking ourselves what we know for sure also reveals, and here's an important part, what we actually don't know for sure. So what we don't actually know for sure stems from when we start thinking about what we do know. And when we start to correlate those two things, we'll realize that there's a lot of missing pieces. So the puzzle that we've put together, we can start to deconstruct and recognize, oh, there's a lot of missing pieces here. I don't have the full picture. My story that I'm telling myself is not complete. And that's really important. Okay? Let me give you a quick real life vulnerable example. Not too long ago, I had a conversation with one of my children, and I love my kids, and they know that. But I'm going to use this as an example. One of them came to me and they wanted something, right? Dad, I really want this. And I was like, okay, well, what do you need it for? And they briefly explain, and I can tell it's not a need, but more of a want. And they change their mind often, right? And because of that, I'm not quick to give them what they are asking for right in the moment. So I tell them, well, why don't you give it a few days, maybe even a week, and then come back. And if you still feel strongly that this is something that you need, right, let me know and we'll figure it out. And their reaction absolutely sucked, right? For some reason, right, and I'll get into it a little bit later, their reaction was this: Dad, you always do this. Whenever I need something, you always make me wait. Like I need something like right now. This is important. And right there, right, I should have paused, I should have processed, and I should have proceeded. But here's what happened. I reacted. I reacted because my immediate story that I was telling myself was, this spoiled brat, like I don't always do this. I give you a lot of things right away. And you're very blessed to get a lot of things. So how dare you talk to me that way, right? What's going on here? And that was pretty much my response. Wait a second, what did you say? Right? I do that all the time. I don't do that all the time. And then they realized what is going on, but now they're in the trenches of feeling defensive. And then it just became a fairly quick, fortunately short argument. They walked off, ticked off, and I stood there ticked off, right? And it wasn't good. And here's the interesting part about pause, process, and proceed. Please remember this. Please be kind and patient and loving to yourself, because I realized I made a mistake. And yes, there's the ideal versus the real all the time. Ideally, I should have paused, processed, and proceeded before I even reacted, but I didn't. Now that they left angry and I'm still standing there angry, now I'm pausing and processing and proceeding. And here's an important thing that you need to remember, my friends. It's never too late. Yes, ideally we want to do it at a certain time, but realistically, the real is sometimes we don't. But we should do it no matter what at some point, because by pausing, processing, and proceeding, eventually, maybe not initially, it will still impact our overall health and capacity to have meaningful conversations. So with that story in mind, look what happened. I needed to, while I stood there frustrated, I paused. I then started to tell myself the story that I am believing and seeing. And as I started to think about that, I started to think about my thoughts compared to facts. Okay, here's the facts. I don't actually really know why it's so important to my child, right? They briefly gave me some, teenage explanation, which is pretty vague, right? And I didn't really know exactly what they wanted, right? And why they felt they needed it so quickly. So I realized that I, was thinking about things, but I didn't really have all the facts. And as I started to spend time, with my story, like step number one, I also started to realize a couple things that were really important, right? The story I was telling myself was coming from a place where, they clearly have something that they feel passionately about. And I immediately interjected something in my story from all the experiences before. Remember when I was telling the story, I said, they always do this. They change their mind. They say they need something. And then like a week later, what they needed, they didn't really need, and they've replaced it with something else. Kids always need things, right? And they always think it's life or death and they need it immediately, right? Maybe we do that often too. But it's interesting that the story I told myself, was based off the foundation of, all that preconceived feelings and thoughts of all the things that they've done in the past. And so once I started to realize that my story was tainted, number two became really important. What do I actually know for sure? Well, I didn't know too much for sure. I knew that they wanted something. I know that they've asked me for many things in the past, but I didn't really know too many details. And then that led me to step number three, which I want to introduce right now. You see it on the screen, right? What's a healthier story I should tell myself? Here's where ambiguity becomes a blessing to emotional intelligence. Let me not define the experience by my story being the truth, but what healthier story can I tell myself, right? And as I do this, I start to recognize, okay, wait a second. My kids, even though, they get a lot and sometimes, I might feel they're spoiled, they are grateful and they do express gratitude. They do say, hey, Dad, I love you. Thank you so much for this. The other day, my son said, hey, you're the best. Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you. Like, those are important things. That doesn't sound like a spoiled, selfish kid. It sounds like a kid who recognizes and understands, right? And is grateful. So as I start to replace my initial story with a healthier perspective or story, that story starts to tell me my kids are grateful. They do get frustrated sometimes. They do say things, right, that doesn't make sense. But that's usually coming from a place because they are reacting and they want something that's important to them. So maybe I should find out what they need. Because overall, I'm pretty lucky to have the kids that I have and they're awesome. So you see that initial story starts to be replaced. And it's because I've paused, processed, and that processing is these three steps. And then my proceeding was I went upstairs, knocked on the door of this particular kid and said, hey, I want to apologize for my reaction. Wasn't good. And tell me a little bit more. Like what do you feel, you need this for immediately? I just want to learn. And the answer is not no. The answer is not yes. The conversation is tell me more. And they opened up and they shared some things. And which is interesting, when they walked away, and I came back and now we were talking after, they were far more, apologetic and grateful, and it was a better conversation. And it was interesting because they shared things with me, their step two, the things that I didn't know for sure, I then understood. And it ended up where I said, okay, you know what? Tomorrow let's go out and we'll get you that. Because now I understand it's coming from a place of both want and actual need. And there it is, right? Remember I said this, teenagers, right? They say they need things, but they really want them. No, in this case, the story I was telling myself wasn't just, that's the typical teenager. No, they actually needed this. And so I was grateful for this experience. Now, out of vulnerability, I share that with you. It just goes to show you that you can write a book and you can coach and you can teach people and train people, but we never arrive. We are always on the journey to better improved emotional health. Okay? So my friends, I hope that helps. I hope that for those who have reached out and asked the question, hey, I'm pausing, but I'm still wrestling with these feelings that still seem to be taking over. How can you help me with this? There it is. These 3 steps. Once you pause, remember that pausing starts the rewiring process. And then as you start to process what you're feeling, do it with number 1, what story am I telling myself, right? How can I replace my thoughts, right, with better facts? Because that goes into number 2, right, which is that important lesson of what do I actually know for sure? And here it is again on the screen. I have this thing that's really important, right? By number 2, you force your brain to separate assumption from facts, right? Stepping off the ladder of inference. That's why number 2 is so important. And that's what you want to do once you pause. And then number 3 is you start telling yourself a different story, right? Or a healthier version of the story. Add ambiguity to your experience, because now you give yourself a reason to be more faithful and hopeful in people, right? And develop empathy. The reality is some people might just be mean and they might just, have bad intentions, and conversations can be hurtful. But it's your job to be more optimistic, right? And by pausing, processing, and proceeding, you give yourself a fighting chance to rewire your initial reaction, regardless of someone else's intention, and you can become more intentional and more deliberate in your response rather than reactive. My friends, I hope that helps. I'm grateful for you. And again, be kind, be loving to yourself, right? We're doing good things. We're trying to build meaningful relationships. So please, to be stronger on the inside, focus on, pause, process, and proceed. Get the book, right? Learn more. There's a couple links down below. Thank you for your time. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye. You got to get the book.